Good morning. My name is Jacob Eischen. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager here at Optym. And today we'll be hosting a webinar with Phil, Rhett, and Dave, which we'll get into full introductions here in a minute. But if you have any questions for the panelists, the chat is open and you're able to add any questions there. And as we get to them, Chris or myself can pose those questions to the panel. And we'll try and leave some time at the end as well for some dialogue and conversation there. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be tuning in from. So really appreciate everybody joining today, and got a really cool topic that I think anybody in this industry has probably had discussions about at one point or another. And I think it's around, it's around the driver component of our issue, which is often something that I feel like is, depending on market conditions, which we'll get into, can be a top of mind topic or can tend to go to the back burner again. And I think having the experts on like we have today is going to really shed a lot of light on a myriad of topics related to the transparency involved in the driver community, the techniques and best practices for recruiting and training, retaining. And so, yeah, I got three special guests on. I'll let each of them kind of give a brief introduction on them. So based on my Zoom camera pane, it looks like Phil Wilt's going to be our first guest, and then we'll follow it up with Dave Renfrew, and then Rhett Roberson over on my far panel anyway. So, Phil, you want to give out a quick brief intro on yourself and your company?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Phil Wilt. I'm the President, Chief Operating Officer at American Central Transport, known as ACT. We're based in Kansas City, Missouri. Full truckload, dry van carrier. We focus really on the Midwest. We do go out to the East Coast. We're pretty disciplined in the markets that we run in. We specialize in drop and hook. So we run a 3-trailer to every tractor. And we are, as a whole, kind of an irregular route carrier, working more on dedicated engineered, and it's kind of really becoming more of our specialty.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. I think Dave, you're next in my after Phil in my panel anyway.
All right. Hello, everybody. Dave Renfrew. I work for EB Technologies. We have many back office support for like RPAs, mobile comms, finance, everything, but also ATS and safety platform. I've been in the industry 30, I don't want to say too long, but it's been a long time, 30 some years, we'll say. Overseeing recruiting and safety departments through my career. And right now, I'm just trying to get out there and just pay it forward, help everybody out, do what I can for other upcoming leaders as well. So awesome. Thank you.
Likewise, Dave, appreciate you joining. And last but not least, we got Rhett, man. Rhett, want to give a quick intro on yourself?
Yeah. Rhett Roberson. I'm the Director of Recruiting and Employee Engagement here at Christensen Transportation. Not too far from Phil. We're both members of the Missouri Trucking Association. Both of our companies do kind of similar freight and live out of a similar network here. We do focus kind of east of I-35, dry freight, almost the same ratio, truck to trailer. It's a good strong industry here in Missouri. So I'm glad to see Phil here. I was just up at ACT recently, and they're a good bunch. And I can't say so much for Dave, but I'm just kidding. I love Mr. Renfrew over there. He's a good friend as well.
Yeah. Nothing better than having a panelist that seem to know each other fairly well. So again, for today, we're going to talk about, again, a lot of driver-centric conversational topics. But I as always, and even before we came on camera this morning with the fellows, it was just a lot of really great points that we didn't even consider. So as I said off camera, guys, please, we're here to learn from you. The audience is here to learn from you. So anything that you guys feel is pertinent to this conversation, even if it seems like it may not be, please chime in with that. So I guess I'll start out, guys, to kind of level set. We've all been through a pretty turbulent period of market change, right? So I'll just say this: during during the heyday of the pandemic, I can't tell you how many times we saw social media and just general topics talking about how much we love our drivers, we care for our drivers, we need drivers. There was, every day, right? And I would argue, and I speculate that since the market is completely flipped, that we don't quite see the emphasis on that level of driver attention, right? And so I think that that's just a sign of the markets, but I think all of you guys have been through the cyclical nature of how trucking markets can ebb and flow. And so with that, I kind of, maybe I'll start with Rhett, give you the first shot at this time. Rhett, can you just give us, and again, it's somewhat subjective, but give us a high level of kind of what you've seen transpire over the course of the last, say, 2-ish years since the heyday of COVID and where we are now. What are you seeing? Is that a fair statement I made earlier, which I think is indicative of probably the broader market's thoughts? But
Yeah.
And I'll go over to Dave and Phil as well.
Yeah, and I love what you had to say there, because I feel like it's touching on something that is important to me, but is maybe not necessarily a popular opinion in the industry. And to me, that thing is that we say a lot in our industry about how much we care about this and we care about that. And what frustrates me the most is when we don't put the manpower behind it. We say how important things are to us to the extent that it meets the means to the end. And so, to your point, I think over the last few months, you see the people who really meant it, who really take it to heart. And I think the drivers experience that. And drivers aren't dumb. You can go out there and blow smoke all you want to, but as soon as you get them to your company and they're just another piece of equipment, they know, they know that. So it's always frustrated me that we give them a week in September to say, drivers, you're appreciated here, and we're going to make a big deal of it, and you're going to get a nice new backpack, or whatever it is, But yeah, I think to your point, the drivers are going to start to see the companies that really mean it, that it's really a driver-centric culture. And I think you have to set a trucking company up that way to be successful in times like these.
Well said. I like to think that any human, function or job is not looked at as a commodity. And I think sometimes in drivers, we kind of refer to them, right, as in another class of citizens that, we'll let you know when we need you, and we don't. We tend to, and again, I'm not saying this across the board, but there is a pervasive mentality in a lot of circles I've engaged with that kind of look at it as, hey, we'll show our appreciation, whether it's 1 week a year or whether the market's tight, we need to do it on a more regular basis. But it still doesn't, to your point, Rhett, it's like they're human too, right? We need to make sure that the driver, the men and women out there are, they're doing a role that none of us could obviously do. That's why we're all sitting in a chair this morning. So, Dave, what would you add to that, Dave, from your perspective?
No, Rhett's absolutely right. I've been in the industry so long and just saw how drivers were treated. We're going back 37 years, and then just watching the progression, how things have changed. And obviously, the pandemic brought in a whole nother perspective. We lost a lot of drivers leaving, and then the work-life balance became a big topic of discussion, and how they want to be treated and everything else. So it goes back to the beginning of when you're, trying to recruit a driver. It's just being very transparent with them. We were talking about on the side a little bit. Tell them what's going on. Be honest with them, because the worst thing you can do to any driver, in fact, we're going to talk more on the driver's side a little bit here, but the worst thing you can do is have a driver come to you and find out what you were told is not right. So it's cultivating, a culture of engagement with your drivers and being able to be, engage with them. Because when you're engaging with the drivers, they'll engage back with you. Those are the ones that are going to stay. The ones that aren't engaging, those are the ones you have to watch out and maybe do some extra things to talk to them. But it's a tough market out there. It's a tough life skill, what these drivers do, how they have to go live and, out in the trucks. They're gone for weeks at a time. And there's a lot of companies that have done a really good job on operation wise when they're trying to make them, come out back and trying to get them home more often. But, Phil can speak on an operation that can be pretty challenging to try to get them home more often, because you've got your shippers and your clients and everything else that they have expectations of what they want delivered, when they want it delivered, and everything like that. But again, it's at the beginning, being transparent, be honest with them. It's not a good fit. Every driver is not a good fit for every company. And the more you can dive into the driver, why he's leaving, where he's at, and coming to where you are, you can get a better feeling for maybe, hey, is this a good fit for me?
Well said, Dave. And I think that kind of segued into getting Phil's perspective. So certainly want to let you chime in, Phil.
Yeah, I agree with both of my fellow panelists. What I would say about us is I wish we could control the whole industry, but all we can do is control ourselves.
Yeah.
And so we are the same today as we were prior to the COVID and then in the middle of COVID, meaning we try to make that driver experience as positive as we can and value them. We never take them for granted. And even though the market has been oversold and we've been in a trucking recession for 2+ years, the demand is not as great for obviously for a driver, but keeping high quality, high caliber drivers is in huge demand. And so you only do that by being consistent in who you are. And so I think for us that has been really important. Every company has, not every company's for every driver, and not every driver's for every company. We all have our own personalities, our own culture, our own specialties of what we do, which is good considering how many trucking companies are out there. But, I would just say you can't be short-sighted. Like, you should never take a driver for granted. And, you should always hold them as valuable they are. Probably my greatest frustration coming out of COVID was, I think the citizens of the US decided, wow, these people on the front line, they should be celebrated and be valued. And I think the thing that's been the most disheartening for me as we've come out of it is it's back to, oh, that's a driver and blah, blah, blah. And we should never discount their value, because what they do, and I'm a wave the flag, believe in, American pie of, they are the backbone of this country. And so I think you have to always appreciate and value every person, but particularly drivers, because they are on the front line every day dealing with lots of things that are really difficult. And what we do is so simple. I'm just hauling your freight from here to there. But oh my goodness, between regulations and the motoring public and equipment and things that you think can't go wrong. And then we operationally are here to support and try to help that driver through it. So, they should be celebrated for what they do and never underestimated their value is what I would say.
Very well stated, Phil. Before we came on camera, we were talking about just the nature of the transparency, right? And I think, and I'll turn it over to Dave, because I think he had a great idea about making sure that it's more than just once a week. It's an ongoing practice within a company to make sure that the drivers stay on top of the latest and greatest in the market, things they may not have exposure to, unlike some of you guys on the panel, right? Attending conferences and more leadership roles and having more strategic understanding of how businesses are operating. So Dave, I really love for you to highlight what we did right before camera on kind of one of your practices over there.
I think that was Rhett that you meant that.
Was that Rhett? Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Don't want to take any credit for Rhett there. Go ahead, Rhett.
No, I think the things we were talking about prior to us kicking into this, that constant communication. I know Phil and ACT, they have a little bit tighter of a cadence with what we call a town hall. Phil, what do you guys call it again?
Fact time.
Okay, yeah. So, we do quarterly town halls, and most recently, just kind of done what we just called a general market update, which we film ahead of time and send out to them via a link through the Samsara system that we use for our logs. And that lets us communicate. And I think, Dave spoke to it a little bit. It is about communication, and drivers want that communication. People don't like ambiguity. People don't like to make guesses. And when you let people make guesses, they're going to run with a story that makes sense to them and isn't necessarily a story. I had a driver call me yesterday and say, hey, are we being sold to this trucking company? Absolutely not even on the
News
table,
to me.
right? And that's what I said. I was like, well, if we are, that was the first time hearing about it. But that's the kind of stuff that if you're not communicating, it's similar to culture. I say this all the time. If you're not building a culture is being built without you. If you're not communicating your message, a message is being built without you. And you have to stay on that message. You have to reassure drivers. You have to let drivers know why things are hard. And that helps all of us in this market, that the bouncing around isn't good for us or for them, and part of what we talked about before this was a lot of the advertising for this webinar even was like, it could cost $12,000 to replace a driver in your fleet. Well, yeah, that's true. And that's bad for us. But it costs drivers money to switch jobs too. And if they're just doing it because they think there's a grass is greener because a recruiter told them a number from last year about how many miles they might get. I'm not saying they're doing it with ill intentions, but If we're if what we're doing is even just a little bit dishonest, accidentally, that disadvantages the driver. So when we talk about making this driver-centric push, this thing that we're talking about where we really care about drivers and we cherish drivers, and they should be celebrated. Well, we need to train internally as well for what's the best for the driver.
Yep.
Dave, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's just crazy. I mean, one of things is driver turnover since 1990 has been 90% or more. Yeah. And it continues to go on. And it's amazing that there's a lot of companies that bake in turnover into their P&L. And there's a lot of big companies that do that. And that's one thing that you could try to change and control that would change your bottom line immediately is your driver turnover. And they talk about driver pay. Is it really driver pay? There's so many links to driver pay, whether it's miles and, they're actually, wanting to get home more. I mean, there's things that you have to deep look into. So, again, you should be asking, what can I do to improve the quality, the life of a driver? All companies should be trying to look at that one way or another. Is it all feasible to do? No. But if you're trying to make attempts and you're being transparent and open to your drivers, your community there of what you're trying to do, I think that brings a lot of emphasis on it. And for your company, showing the true will that, hey, we're hearing you, we're listening to you, because they're frontline. They're dealing with all the shippers. They're dealing with their traffic. All these horrible things that they have to every day. These four-wheelers, the driver harassment out there. I mean, you're hearing about drivers getting shot, and it's just horrible things going on out there. But it goes back. I mean, this driver turnover is ridiculous, and it's not an easy thing to fix. And I'm going to talk about driver's perspective here in a little bit, but goodness gracious, we could all do better. Sure. And, like Rhett said, just being honest with your drivers when you're in the recruiting process. Yes, you're competing against probably 5 to 7 companies when they're applying. That's how many different companies they're looking at. And we've made it so easy for drivers to switch jobs. So easy. I mean,
Phil, I'd love to, and again, great point, Dave. Phil, I mean, as a COO over at ACT within the operation, does that resonate with you as well from kind of a slightly different role within your organization?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think about transparency, Dave, and I just think that's so important. We try to do it at multiple levels so that we can retain. I mean, let's be honest, is all of these things help us have a very compelling offer for a driver to drive for us. And we look at it every day. We have to earn the right for them to drive for us. So what does that look like? Well, transparency, I think, especially in the recruiting industry, there's a lot of things that are said that don't really develop. In other words, a driver, what they thought they were buying is not what they really got. And so, we're very upfront about, hey, here's your pay package. Here's what it looks like. It's said, we sent it to them, and we send it to them in writing, either text or through 10 Street or through the app through there or through an email. But we put that in writing, and when they start, we also have them sign off on it. We don't want there to be any reasons why they think we're not being honest and upfront about what they're buying when they come here. And that's really what you're doing. The thing that's probably frustrating is drivers change seats. And man, Dave, what you said is so easy. We have made it so easy for drivers to go from one company to another. And the reality is drivers lose money every time they do that, and yet can become so short-sighted by that. And so I think all those things really kind of play kind of in that component. And what Rhett was talking about, we also try to be transparent, though, what's going on with our freight levels. Yeah, we've been in a freight recession for 2 years, and it's been difficult, and it's been really hard compared to coming the best freight I've ever seen in my entire career, coming off of what COVID did for us. I mean, it was terrible. It was hard. And yet, my goodness, the freight, I mean, if you weren't making money then, I don't know, you'll never make money. And now we're at a point where it's depressed. I mean, as good as it is, now as low as it is. And so I think what happens is drivers, we all do, we learn to live within that lifestyle. Here's how much money I've got coming in. And so, the challenge gets to be as freight pulls back, margins pull back. So what does that mean? There's not as many miles, and it means those pay increases are not coming as rapid as they were, and they were coming rapid. And so all of that, in the spirit of transparency, is saying, drivers, we just got to tell you what's going on in the industry, what's going on in the world, the global market, how that affects our freight that we haul, how that affects our competitors. And so we try to be really honest. We do these monthly meetings. We do lots of things with going to our organizations. They're private. They're just for our drivers. But we're honest, and they're not always fun. Because, I have to say, I wish I could tell you that what we see happening in our crystal ball, which is broken, it says that things are going to be better. But, it looks like we're going to endure this a little bit longer. And yet we're preparing, there's a speaker of a mega carrier that talks about endure and thrive. And I think, we're getting closer to that. But there's a lot of enduring going on because it was so good, and now it's tough. And, and so we're just trying to be consistent and transparent through all of that, and hope that, that they get that, and that we still earn the right to retain them through that process.
Yeah, it's interesting that you hear, I think maybe Dave, you had mentioned that, attrition rates, it's no secret, right? I think you had said 90 to 100. I've always heard 100 or more. And I always think, what industry would survive if the attrition rate was at 100%, like on a regular basis? So, and I think, again, it goes back to that, again, the transparency. And I commend all of you for having those, whether it's a town hall or any kind of just driver-centric discussions internally, to make sure that if there's an appetite to understand more what you're seeing at your level, that there's an interest for them to know. So, one of the other thing, guys, this is the hot topic, right? We all heard about the quote unquote driver shortage. Some say it's there's a shortage of good drivers. You guys have been around the block a few times over the years. You've probably seen the makeup and the demographic of the driver change over those years. So I want to it's a twofold question. And again, this can be just whoever wants to tackle it first. Is there a driver shortage? And maybe we argue in the market today, like, nope, we're not seeing it nearly as pronounced as we probably were during the heyday of the pandemic. But so that's the first question. What is that? What can the audience is like? Can we just get a verdict on this one way or another? I'd love to hear from you guys. And then secondly, I'd love for you to touch on how you guys have seen that driver demographic, whether it's cultural differences have come in, language barriers, the appetite for using technology. We can take that in a lot of directions, but I think that's good for the audience to hear a little more context in that regard. So whoever wants to tackle that first, I'm all ears.
This one could be a webinar of its own. And I've heard plenty of people that are far more qualified than me to talk on this say both directions. Is there a driver shortage? Kind of depends how you look at it. Do I think sometimes we mean, is there a shortage of the old Smokey and the Bandit driver that wants to be out 6 weeks at a time and live that particular lifestyle? Because that would be a lot easier to manage from an operations standpoint.
Sure.
There's probably a shortage of that driver. But I mean, for the safety department, that's probably all the better. There's also some really interesting discussion now, we're talking about at a federal level, access to parking for drivers, things like that you might not think falls into that same discussion. But if a driver's burning 15 or 20% of their clock every day looking for places to stop the truck, safe places to take a break, safe place for parking. Well, if you extrapolate that out down the line across all the drivers, you've increased the workforce by 15 to 20% if we all have access to safe parking, right? Do we have a utilization problem? Probably. And that's something that probably all of us are working on to some degree, because better utilization, better efficiency of the equipment and of the driver's clock is good for everybody. Your point too, do we have a shortage of good drivers?
I'll use good in air quotes because good is subjective,
that's a very subjective term. We probably have, I think maybe more accurate would be, we have a shortage of the drivers that fit our particular needs as a carrier. And both Phil and Dave said it, that not every trucking company is for every driver. So I can find, now Phil and I are probably in similar shoes as far as the drivers we look for, but let's say we're not. Let's say we're very different companies, right? Like if I hired one of Phil's drivers that's been very successful over there, they may work here for 6 weeks and go right back to Phil.
Sure, it happens. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the struggle comes with communicating, and you see how all this stuff layers on top of itself. Communicating proper expectations, what you're getting at this job, so that we find the driver that's right for us, and we provide an opportunity for them that's right for them. So it's much more complicated than a driver shortage. If we could be 100% efficient with the exact drivers we need in each of our fleets, and we stop bouncing them around and stop asking them to learn different systems, we'd be much closer. If we had that extra 15% of their clock because of access to parking, we'd be much closer. There are a lot of factors here. But I think we're always going to be looking for that next great driver that fits our system.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the parking. I mean, as the holidays aren't too far out, I think about just going to the mall and the frustration that comes into just your personal vehicle trying to find a spot. And
imagine doing that every night.
In a much, much larger vehicle, right? I'm so pleased to see that from FMCSA and at the federal level, and then a lot of startups and other companies starting to realize, hey, we've got to get a handle on this truck parking situation. So well said. Phil, I'll turn it over to you, man, as far as, again, two-party question there. What is your thoughts on the shortage? And also, what are you seeing over your time in terms of how the driver population, the demographic, in all ways and shapes has changed over the years?
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think there's always a shortage for really good drivers, probably particularly for what we're looking for. I mean, there's a lot of, we can't hire everyone because our standards are pretty high. And then we have things like event recorders and stuff like that. And some drivers just don't want to be part of that. But it's part of our safety culture, and that's okay. If you don't want to be part of that, it does, again, it's not a fit for us. So that's cool. But I would put more of my comments more toward what is drivers looking for. And man, has that changed in my 18 years here at the company. Of where it used to be kind of take it, this is what we've got. Over the road, irregular route, the hardest stuff in the world, which is what we did. Maybe it was at coast to coast. And, shippers have changed a lot. Warehousing has moved and is so much closer to us as consumers. We want things now fast. And so that has changed miles and all of that. But I think probably the thing that's really changed overall what the driver's looking for was the pandemic. Because drivers started to understand their need and their demand. And with that became the fact of, I want what you have. I want what our office folks have which is I want work-life balance. And by far, that is the largest thing that we see. When we lose a driver, a lot of times it's because, well, I'm going local, or I can do this and I can be home nightly. And so for us as a carrier, it through the pandemic, we really started to evaluate our freight and our customers, and where we started to take out fringe and just cutting that out of our network. And we are looking for heavy concentrations, because if we can keep a driver moving and get them miles and they make good pay, but we can get them back home or get them home twice a week, maybe not every night, or 3 times a week. And sometimes it is every night, but it's really pushed us to look differently because they want work-life balance. And why shouldn't they have that? I want that. I have to travel a lot for work, but man, the older I get, that's overrated. I want to be home. And so drivers are looking for that. They're wanting the pay to go with that. We've certainly have seen with every pay increase that we went up, this one makes me scratch my head. But what we find is as pay goes up, if I can be home more, drive less miles, but make the same amount of money because my pay increased, then I'm going to do that. And there's been a lot of studies around that shows that that's really true. Again, it's really getting at the heart of what a driver wants, which is I want to be at my son's ball game. I want to be at my grandson's, whatever the case may be. Try to go to a doctor if you're a driver over the weekend. Good luck. That doesn't work that way. If you're going to go in for a physical or some things that are going on, they're not going to see you on the weekend, and so all of these things start to fit into the compelling offer of what a driver really wants. And so they're becoming more selective in what they want. And there are lots of options out there. You think about how many construction jobs there are, and it seems like transportation always battles back and forth.
That's right.
with construction. Now there's a lot of infrastructure work going on, which is good. We need that. But I think all of these things, along with all the regulations, the parking, how distracted people are on the roads beside them, how everyone wants to sue you for everything that you didn't do. I mean, and drivers get pulled into those things. And so the thing that's probably the thing keeps me up at night is worrying that drivers say, I'm tired of it. You know, I want to get out of it. And so I just think we have to really look at what they're looking for, and then look at your company and see what you can do to come alongside that. And I can tell you strategically, it's really making us evaluate freight, customers, and looking at new ideas and new stuff like that, because we want to have the reason why you want to drive for us. I mean, you may be a great company, but if you don't have the freight they're looking for, they will vote with their feet. And so even if they love you, I mean, it still doesn't mean that what's going on in their family, maybe their wife just got a diagnosis for cancer, or a kid's struggling in school or with drugs. I mean, these are real things that happen all the time. And so that means I've got to be at home. I've got to be home more regular. I've got to be present. And so that work-life balance is a big deal. And I think our entire industry is struggling with it. I know we are struggling with it. We're facing it head on. I almost feel like you can't move fast enough, because drivers, again, I see it right at COVID where, man, it changed drastically and it became a demand. And so again, if you want high quality, high caliber, a lot of those match up with those types of things. And so I would say we get it. That doesn't make it easy, especially on our model, with that.
I think, and I'll switch over for Dave for some final thoughts on this topic. But yeah, I still go back to, it's so unfortunate to not put that human-centric approach when we're talking about drivers, right? I said it off camera, it almost is like they're a commodity, and they're not looked at, they're not humanized. And I love how, Phil, you mentioned like, hey, you know what? So shocker, they want to be home for dinner with their family and special occasions. And like, I love that, we get on another webinar about driver health and how the deterioration of that lifestyle. It almost begs the question, like, who would want this job? There's like, it's really, I feel for you guys trying to, recruit and retain drivers, because the cards are stacked against you in so many ways, that just the lifestyle itself. So I'm hopeful that
there are amazing things with it, but
yeah.
But there is sacrifices for it.
Lots.
There aren't any job. I mean, Rhett's he's really good at what he does. He's got a perfect job, but he still has downsides. I'll guarantee you that. That's true. That's true for me, and that's true for Dave and you too, Chris. I mean, that's true for all of us. And so nothing is perfect.
Right.
And there are things you have to give on. But some things you'll say I'll give for that, and other things you'll say I won't. And so I think there's nothing more honorable than being a driver and what they do for us. But we need to recognize the difficulty and the hardship that it puts them in.
Well said. Dave, any parting thoughts on that topic around shortage, demographics, et cetera, from your perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, I was living it for so long, and I'm kind of thankful I'm not in that little world anymore, because I feel for Rhett and everybody else that's doing it. But driver shortage, I've always questioned. And, to Phil and Rhett's points, it's a quality driver issue. It's just another term, I guess, to what both of them said. But we've had a lot of things that have taken place. We've had the clearinghouse. That's taken out over 200,000 drivers. And it's working, and it's doing its job. And I applaud the FMCSA for that. But that brought it, the quality of drivers that were doing those things that disqualified them, we don't want them in the industry.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I have no tolerance for that whatsoever. We've had a lot of other things. Phil talked a lot of great points right there, the lifestyles, everything, and that what the pandemic freaking triggered that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What it also did, it created a lot of local jobs. Now, local jobs typically didn't pay very well, and now that pay has gotten very well, where they can't afford to work local, and they've made a lot of switches over to those. But yes, OTR drivers, I mean, there's some great benefits to it. I mean, you're going out and seeing beautiful country out there.
Sure.
But to get to see that beautiful country, you're sitting there dealing with, drivers and, rage and everything else on these roads and traffic and, construction and everything that goes on with this. I was reading an article earlier. Yeah, a guy was in a huge fatality accident. He was not clearly speaking English, and he stated that I thought I had a CBL. He said, I thought I had a CBL, and but in the carrier that, for God's sake, that he was working for, did they not do their due diligence?
Yeah.
So there's a lot about driver shortages and stuff. And again, to Rhett and Phil, it's not about every driver's a good fit as well. I mean, and you're sitting there, everybody's fishing from the same pond, looking for the same kind of drivers. Those two probably compete against each other pretty good because they do a lot of the same things. And again, I go back to retain your drivers, doing what you can do to keep them, because you're spending $12,000 to $20,000 hiring a driver. That's hitting your bottom line right there hard. So, we've kind of just regenerated this thing. And what I would like to go into, Chris, though, is talk about it from a driver's perspective.
Yes, absolutely. And Dave, no better person probably to start out with you. We can take this in a lot of directions, but I think, again, this is a struggle I think corporate deals with relative to the reality and trying to see it through the lens of a driver. And I think often in my experience, as a technology optimization software vendor, we can go in there and say, here's what's best for your network, right? Mm-hmm. But we also, and I think that I commend Optym, my company, for doing this, we really put an emphasis on, to your point, Dave, hey, all this is great, but at the end of the day, if the driver's not going to take the freight or you're to a point they're ready to quit, then we've missed the mark, because nothing moves without the driver, willing to take that freight. So, Dave, and I'll switch it over to Rhett and Phil in a minute, but yeah, let's kind of put that. What can we do better?
Well, we talk about what it costs the companies, hiring and losing drivers and everything, but take it from a driver's perspective. I'm pro driver big time. When a driver goes to switch a job, they're typically living paycheck to paycheck. Unfortunately, a lot of them are. There's the others that aren't, so I'm not trying to fall in there. But a company driver is going to lose thousands of dollars switching jobs. And back to what I said earlier, you've got to be conscientious about, because you're affecting somebody's life when you're recruiting them and trying to bring them on. And again, about being transparent, being honest, upfront, making sure it's the right culture for them, everything else like that. Because a driver may be out of work for a week, maybe 2 weeks. Now, what about an owner operator? He's got to drive his truck up there. I mean, that is significant cost to an owner operator. It can be $4,000+ that he's losing easily on this. So, I think it's really important that we all kind of just step back and take a different realization of what we're doing as companies, as individuals, your moral standards, and how we sit there and recruit people. Be honest. We've said it, transparency, be honest, be upfront, and evaluate it. Is it a good fit? Because if it's not a good fit, let's be honest with the drivers. He may be good for Rhett, but he may not be good for Phil, or vice versa, or neither one. But
I like how you said that, and I agree. I think it's great to kind of give them. I don't know if it was Rhett or someone earlier mentioned that the grass is not always greener, and I think you see that in the white collar jobs, right? People just assume a bit more pay. And I'm moving. Doesn't, and you see a lot of times that there's a lot of buyer remorse, regret involved with making those changes. So I commend you guys for, again, in the spirit of transparency and education, saying, hey, just so you're aware before you put in your 2 weeks or just turn the keys, hey, have you considered X, X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C, and all things considered? I think it goes back to, again, being transparent and the educational component. So, Rhett, you mentioned earlier, I want to get back to you, man. You mentioned you didn't think it was so much of a shortage, but just an underutilization of drivers, of assets. I think you see, hours of service, right? We always say, well, they can just drive for 11 hours. I was talking to an academic the other day, and he's like, he was saying, hey, they can drive for 11 hours. And I go, well, do you think they really drive for 11 hours? And he was like, well, that's what the rule is. And I said, again, a very smart man. I said, did you ever take a road trip with the family, when they were younger? And he said, of course. I said, so you never stopped for fuel, bio breaks, food, and stretch your legs? He said, well, of course we did. I go, what makes you think that that's not indicative of like what a truck driver would go through? And so it was just, he said, well, how many hours do you think we actually get of true driving? I said, well, 11 goes to, and I'll defer to you guys. I would say somewhere between maybe 6.5, 7. And again, I don't have any data points, but that's probably, we're losing a lot of time by making them sit and dwell times at the guard checks, check-ins, parking. That's eating away at that clock. And that's frustration, right? We hate it when our flight gets delayed more than once, right? If once at all. And I can only imagine that frustration that comes with that. So Rhett, I just, please add a little color there to that portion of the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's touching on a lot of points we've discussed already, and that's considering the human element that's in the truck. That there's more to it than just we're not operating like a piece of machinery. Sometimes we got to go to the bathroom. Just the most basic thing. Sometimes we're stuck on the highway in a place where there's traffic, and so 4 hours in traffic is different than 4 hours driving down the interstate in Nebraska. Time is not necessarily the indicator. It's what you're doing with the time, right? So yeah, they can drive for 11 hours, but if I drive 11 hours at 10 miles an hour, it's a whole different situation, right?
That's right.
But when we consider those things, when we consider things from an academic perspective, or from these trade magazines that are doing, or anybody that's doing any kind of research, sometimes it's easy to dehumanize that driver. It's easy to do that in the office. It's easy for the operations people to dehumanize drivers, because the drivers that they hear from most frequently are their trouble drivers, and so then you start to get this idea internalized that every driver out there is a little bit of trouble too. That's a culture thing, I really like what Dave said about kind of our moral obligations to these drivers. To go back to what Dave was saying about kind of doing the right thing for the drivers and coaching them. And I think that's where we started down this path. It is like, to me, I hate having to provide an ROI on the ethical reasoning why we should do things. Yeah, of course, if we provide proper expectations and we actually coach the drivers on why this might not be the right opportunity for them, we're going to have less turnover, probably. Yeah. We might have to spend a little bit more to bring more leads in, because it is a numbers game. As far as leads are concerned. But if I'm looking at, and I encourage my recruiters, if I'm looking at a driver who's hopped several jobs in the last 3 years, I'll call him up myself, and say, because they'll ask me what I think. I'll call him up myself and say, hey, you've got a pretty good look at the industry, right? If you've tried 6 different trucking companies, we've all got different systems, and we all have different things to offer. But when you've been to 6 different ones in the last 3 years, you got a pretty good baseline of what trucking companies are going to act like. And I'm not trying to be rude or mean. I just want to make sure this is the right thing, that I can actually provide you what you're looking for. So what are you looking for? I feel like that's an ethical obligation for me, to do the right thing and not bring the driver here and not have them expecting something. That was Phil's discussion earlier about these proper expectations. We do a similar thing where they sit down the first day of orientation over lunch with our director of our driver managers, and he just leads them through and a discussion about expectations for this job. And that really is an opportunity that first day, that if that's not going to line up, that we can walk out on the first day.
Yeah, no hard feelings. Better to know up front, right?
Right, absolutely. So we need to spend more time from that driver's perspective. I think it does benefit us. I think it's easy to show an ROI with that, but I think we all know that it's the right thing to do. Those guys have families, and they have bills, and they have mortgages. And we do an orientation every week. It's easy to put them through the rat race of orientation, put them through that grind that we go through every week, and forget that. Think of the last time you changed a job. That first day on the job is nerve-wracking. Everything is uncertain. It's a huge change in your life. Even for the drivers that have jumped a bunch of jobs in the last 3 years, they're still making a significant change. And I try to instill that in my orientation folks, my onboarding folks, that this is a very nerve-wracking day for these people. It's another orientation for you, but this is a big deal for them.
Yeah.
So there's a human being coming here that's making a really big change in their life. And if you make every decision, from recruiting to onboarding to the way we work in operations to even offboarding, that's a human being that has a life and a family and a mortgage and a car payment, this industry would be a different place. And I think, it's like we're all in a standoff, like who's going to lower their gun first. But I think we have an obligation because we can still hire. We can still hire just fine without bringing on people and tricking them.
Yeah.
And that's my obligation as a director of recruiting here, is to do it in an ethical way, in a way that actually takes care of the drivers. And that's another way that we can actually have an actionable way of saying that we really care about drivers. It's not backpacks in September. It's making sure that you don't make a poor life decision.
Yeah.
We all have this obligation. We all have this opportunity to treat drivers like more than a commodity.
Couldn't have said it better. Guys, I wanted to, and I'll start with Phil on this one, I guess. We've seen, technology is obviously coming into the picture and more rapidly as of late with the AI boom, autonomous vehicles. That's another thing I look at. If I'm going into a profession that I feel like my job's going to be automated in years to come, is it worth me really? You guys mentioned the parallel between going into construction and those type of trades versus driving. And if I'm thinking about all the headlines or, autonomous trucks and, whether that's real or how far out that is it's certainly something that anyone going into this profession would be probably considering. Am I going down a dead end career path? So, Phil, I'll turn to you. You've seen a lot of technology come and go and change over the years. What can tech vendors do if they're, and again, whatever, whether it's ELD, whether it's the 10 streets on the recruiting side, whether it's optimization, route planning, all that. What advice do you have for people that are trying to service this industry? And again, it goes back to like, maybe you need to consider more the driver-centric approach. That could be a valid answer, but just in general, Phil, what advice do you have for whether it's tech vendors or other leaders in roles like yours on how we adopt and apply technology and how that really has a real outcome on the driver?
Yeah, I think I would say two things. One is really listen to what your customer's saying and don't just try to sell something that is the latest and greatest. I think for us, we've hit some snafus on some different things that we've tried to implement within the last year. And it's because sometimes the piece that we're bringing in doesn't work with our back office side, your base primary system. And when that doesn't happen, it doesn't flow well. And so what you're trying to do that helps your drivers out, or you have better analytics, or the driver experience, if those things don't all flow, it just doesn't make sense. And I think that's one of the things that is a little challenging right now in our industry is everything is so disjointed.
Yeah.
Even with the manufacturers. So Freightliners will work with this, or Cummins will work with this, and they're doing some cool things that they're bringing in cab in the truck, but it's got to be able to come into your system. And so there is a lot of walls right now that makes it really difficult for carriers like the size of what Rhett works for and what I work for, to do that. We don't have a massive IT department. A lot of that stuff is farmed out. And so I think you just have to think about the carrier, really listen to what they've got, what kinds of back office, sell them what really will work and what won't work, and be upfront about what those will help do and not do within your system.
Dave, any part? I know you kind of sit in a slightly different perspective these days, but any thoughts on that particular topic around where technology may be helping? Or, I was talking to someone the other day, and there's kind of like, has technology really materially shifted the driver experience? And again, I think it goes back to demographic changes, right? Some folks, an OTR guy, back in my days would love to, as a freight broker, you book the truck and then you go, well, the guy really just wants to talk to another human because he's been on the road forever. And that was kind of that relationship building. Now with technology in the new generation, right? They're kind of like, hey, I just as soon not talk to you at all if I can hit a button on my phone, right? So where do you see that balance taking place?
So that's kind of funny. We'll take some steps back. ELDs came around. All these older drivers going, oh my goodness, I'm not
Big brother. Yeah.
That comes on, I'm done. Well, we got through that. They were fine. All right. Now we got cameras. Oh my goodness, camera. You're going to, everybody in the world seeing everything I do. If it's in facing camera, no, out facing, but that realization, those cameras have saved drivers' jobs, saved the company millions of dollars. So technology under those perspectives is great. Phil was making a comment that, you got all these different platforms all out here, and does it work with our system, our TMS and everything else? At EB, we've made some huge strides. We're able to integrate everything and flow everything into the TMS and things like that. It's done wonderful, but technology can be scary. You know, 2 years ago, the average driver out there was 57. It's down to 47 roughly right now. So you see the changing of the guards of, you know, the age demographically there. So they want more swift. They don't want to talk to people. They want to answer things, you know, digitally or however that may be, or things like that. So you're seeing a switch of guards. The older drivers are starting to leave, they're retiring and everything else. And the younger people, call them younger, 47, that's young to me, that are starting to come in more. Because when they start a job, it's typically probably their third, fourth career when they become a truck driver. It's pretty enormous like that. But technology is playing the favor. It's saving companies money. It's been able to, you know, we got an RPA and things like that we can do, that repetitive task that you've got people doing that make mistakes. We can do it, you know, with our AI and everything. It's taking that repetitive task out and be able to go concentrate more on, you know, whether it's safety or whatever it may be, to be able to go focus on those tasks right there. But technology, it's here. You've got to embrace it. You know, we got AI going on and everything else, the GP chats. And I think we're going to be okay. We're going to be
okay.
You know, to Phil, he's deep into it. You know, I know Rhett is too, but technology is going to be our favorite. You've got to err on caution.
Yeah.
There's a little caution you've got to take with it, but technology's done a great thing for this industry. So I'm good with it.
Very good. Guys, I know, you know, this hour just flew by. I feel like we're just chatting over a cup of coffee, and here we are, you know. So what I would say is, guys, I kind of want to, you know, shift a little bit. Let's say that you guys are the new heads of FMCSA or any kind of federal regulatory committee. You see things through, you see probably, and I'm not saying those folks haven't had exposure to the roles that you guys play in, but probably if they have at all, it's probably been a while. So when you get up to the bureaucracy of, you know, at the lobbyists and the Capitol Hill levels, if you guys are heading over to Capitol Hill to meet with, you know, with those regulators today, what are a couple of things that you really want to make sure they hear you on at that level? Because that's where change occurs, right? At least, and I hate to say it becomes a mandate, whether it's ELD, and there's right, wrong, or indifferent, right? There's reasoning. But what are they overlooking, maybe is the best way to put it. What does that regulator not understand that you guys live and breathe every day that you'd want them to really take note of before you leave DC? And maybe I'll start with Rhett on this one.
Yeah, I think Phil and I certainly have been to DC and the last few years and actually have had these meetings. That parking is the parking deal is a huge one right now, and I think that's something that is actually achievable, that will create a big impact for all of us. Something that is actually being worked on right now, so I think we're going to see some movement on that. Another big one, you know, as it involves keeping our trucking companies safe and keeping drivers wanting to enter the industry, is tort reform, you know, and that's a big one that we're working on, stepping away from these possible nuclear verdicts that we're seeing more and more of. I think people see, you know, I hear all the time, people see these trucks going down the road, it just looks like a big check. But what they don't realize is companies like Christensen, that's a, you know, on the grand scheme of things, is a decent sized carrier.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a majority of the trucking companies in the country are 5 or less trucks, you know. But people see a fleet the size of ours and think insurance money, you know. But what they don't consider is the people that work right outside of my office here. These are people with families just like they are, you know.
Right.
And this trucking company is one nuclear verdict away from 100 people out looking for jobs, you know.
It's a great point. Yeah.
So, you know, and I think that type of fear of being used in a court case, used in litigation as a driver, probably deters a lot of people from wanting to drive over the road. So I think those are two actually actionable items that we can go after, that would really help out carriers and in turn really help out our drivers.
Yeah. Phil, anything to add on that level? Again, sounds like you guys have been to Capitol Hill a few times. So what would you add to that?
Well, I mean, you know, both Christensen and ACT and a lot of other carriers are very active in our state associations, which I would always encourage carriers to do that. and then participate in things like ATA and TCA, because
Yeah.
they are lobbying arms for our industry, and we need it. Someone has got to be out there waving the flag, reminding people making laws and rules about what it's like. And that's probably what I'd say. I would agree. Parking is huge. What it can do for a driver, and even in their hours, because if they know they've got to get parking and then shut down, that reduces their pay, their safety, all of that as well. And so it is a huge deal, especially people entering our industry and females. I think, we talk a lot about our drivers, like safety in general, and feeling like you want to be out there, and that can become a deterrent. And so we have to be careful with that. Port reformer is huge. Man, do I agree with that. There's also the speed limiters. But what I would say in general is this, is I wish we would spend more time talking to the people on the front line. I think if a perfect world would be that they talk to carriers and drivers, and good ones, like ones that are out there, like Rhett said, like battling every day, doing offering great jobs for great people, keeping freight moving and doing it right. Like, talk to those people about what the challenges are, because you can regulate yourself right out of the industry. It has gotten harder and harder in my 18 years in this industry. That part has become less fun. I'm going to be really honest, because so much of my role has become about risk, and to protect our drivers, protect the company. It's in every aspect of this. And so, it would, and yet, boy, do we need trucking companies? Of course we do. I mean, everything that we consume comes to you on a truck. And so right. I think sometimes we just have to think about the end game and about what is this stuff doing? I mean, this isn't really FMCSA, but, thinking about electric, I mean, I would say I'm a big proponent that we need to protect our environment, that we need to be good corporate citizens. But making quick decisions about electrification when we can't afford to do that, or we don't have the grid structure to do that, or what these trucks are going to cost carriers like ours that are going to go to those markets, gets to be limiting and prohibitive. And so, it's at a point of we have to keep goods flowing, and yet we have to really think about, like, we have to be realistic as we regulate. So that we keep things flowing. Of course, we need to be good corporate citizens. Of course, we need to take care of our environment. Yes, we need to do more things. But, the technology in these trucks has come so far in my 18 years, and it is incredible how much cleaner we are than what we used to be. And, we run APs. We do all types of things to try to be good corporate citizens, to be good to our environment. But I think it goes even beyond FMCSA. I mean, I think it's just regulations in general that we have to be thinking about the consequences of those decisions and how they affect the American public, consumers, cost of goods consumed, because all of that, there's no free lunch. If those things happen, that freight's going to have to go up, and consumers are going to pay even more. I mean, the most recent study I saw showed that through the pandemic to today, the average consumer is paying 25% more for food at the grocery store, 35% for fast food. Now, a lot of that's in labor, but we have to keep things reasonably costed, and regulations drive cost, because if you're going to continue to stay in business and do things right, it's just going to cost you a lot more. So I'm a middle ground guy. Let's be reasonable. Let's push ourselves. Let's make ourselves better, but let's also think about the consequences, because you can regulate yourself right out of business. And I just think we have to always throw caution to the wind on things like that.
Very well said, Phil. Dave, I'll close it out with you as we kind of reach the top of the hour. Any other parting thoughts to add on this topic, or any other things we missed today that you would want to make sure we touch on before we part ways?
No, I think Rhett and Phil did a great job covering that. Again, you got lawmakers out there that have no clue. They're relying on us to be able to go provide that information to them. Electricity, where does electricity come from? Remember that. A truck going to cost $400,000. All that's being passed off to the consumers. Everything else, I agree. What I want to finish up with is one thing on the retention. A lot of companies do surveys and all kinds of different things, sending out to their drivers. If you're going to do these surveys, follow up behind them. Communicate, engage with the drivers about your information that you've gathered, about what you can physically and financially do to make changes, because they're telling you what's going on there. And if you're not engaging them and giving them feedback on that, that's detrimental to your culture. So I just wanted to end at that, because I know a lot of people do the surveys and they get some great information, but do something with it. Share back to the community of your drivers what you're doing. Women in trucking, I love. It's over doubled over the last 10 years. Thank you, Ellen Boy, for getting that going. You have Women in Motion now, ATA as well. And then veterans. Hire your veterans. Take care of your veterans out there. So with that, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll kind of touch on that a couple things, guys. How do people? We couldn't possibly cover all these things in too much depth within an hour on a panel. So how do the folks that may want to learn more, could be someone in your similar roles with you guys at other companies, or could be a driver, you never know, how would they reach you? And I guess, Dave, since you're on the camera, how do people reach you?
You can email me, daver@ebe, #inc.com. You can get me there, or, give my number out, 913-660-5659, or look me up at EBE. Be glad to help out. I'm here to pay it forward for everybody that's helped me in my career. I just want to be able to do the same for everybody else that's coming through this. So thanks for having me.
Love it. Absolutely. Phil, contact?
Yeah. So probably my easiest way to contact me is through email.
Okay.
So it's pwilt, so PWILT @American Central, all one word, .com. So pwilt @AmericanCentral.com.
Great. And Rhett, how do folks reach you as well?
I'm a LinkedIn guy.
LinkedIn. Okay. Me too.
Happy to meet up on LinkedIn and chat there. I think you added me this morning, Chris. So
yeah, I'm always network, right?
We're officially network buddies. But yeah, my happy to take an email. It's rhettr@christensentrans.com. But if you can spell my name and Christensen right without looking all that up, you deserve to get an email across.
Hey guys, I'll leave with this too. I know conference season's coming up. I'm a big supporter of TCA, ATA. Can we expect to see you guys at any of those shows? Yeah. Okay. Got some hands raised. Looks like everybody maybe. So, well, look, as a frequent conference goer, I am a big fan of having face-to-face conversations, just like we had today in a virtual environment. I'm hopeful, and I've seen a trend where a lot of companies are bringing drivers, actual drivers. ATA does a wonderful job at the Carrier and Driver Awards. That we talk about the humanization of that. Really, they do a phenomenal job of really going behind just out of the seat of the cab and saying, these are real people, these are their families. And there's the vast majority of drivers I've encountered have been nothing but just salt of the earth, good people. Unfortunately, the world we live in any facet, right, is always going to publicize the negative things, the bad apples. Nothing we can do about that. But yeah, I would love to see, again, a trend where we start seeing more drivers, not just attend, but be up on stage, right? I think we all agree that their perspective is invaluable. And we're basically speculating unless you've never sat in their seat before. So hope to see that continue. And again, looking forward, I'll be out on the road and look forward to seeing you guys. And for everybody else that joined in today, thank you very much. Please take advantage of reaching out with these experts in this category. It's a wealth of knowledge, and we just literally scratched the surface today. So a lot more to come. So with that, again, thanks for everybody for joining, and have a good one. We'll be back for another webinar here in the near future.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you.